Okay, so like I said, back to our final speaker for the day. So this is Dr. Meredith Boulden. I have known Meredith since she started working as our grad assistant in my library department, research and instructional services. Just graduated with her PhD in English department. And as I mentioned, she, since the very first beginnings of the dissertation writing retreat back when we were brainstorming things in the fall of 2019, Meredith has sort of been my, I don't know, my right-hand person, my partner in crime.
I twisted his arm until letting me help. I basically just pounded him until he agreed to let me help because he's terrible at delegating.
She is not incorrect. But anyway, but she also, during the process of writing her own dissertation and attending these initial events, along with helping to plan the events, she was also at the same time in another writing group, and her experiences that were very helpful and beneficial to her. And so as we've continued to evolve the DWR program, I have twisted her arm to bringing some of her experiences, expertise, and thoughts into how to, well, forming and sustaining writing groups. Because dissertations can feel lonely, and it's good to have a party helping you along the way. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Boulden.
Thank you. I will do my best to project my voice still. I'm typically a rather soft-spoken person, so can y'all hear me kind of back there? Great. If for some reason I drop, just kind of like raise your hand, and I'll hopefully see you and be able to kind of heighten the level of my voice. So I wanted to ask you guys just a quick question before we get into the kind of nitty-gritty. Can I see by a show of hands anyone who has who is either currently in a writing group or partnership or has tried to form a writing group? See, okay, Will back, Brett says comment. Okay, so tonight, and we're going to start really at the base level of if it's something that you're interested in. I mean, I'm kind of here to convince you that it's something that's worth your while, but then also to give you some of the more nuanced steps that you can take and things that you can consider if you do decide to start a writing group. The points that we're going to cover today are these. First of all, we're going to quickly discuss why are writing groups important. Secondly, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own doctoral journey, including being a part of a writing group. We're going to cover some of the things that you should consider when forming a group, and then some of the ways that you can sustain that group's kind of continuity for a particular length of time until you can graduate or complete whatever goal it is that you're working on. And then lastly, we have some exciting news coming from the CWC and their partnership with the DWR, the pilot program for writing groups that we're starting this fall. So again, there's that question, why? Who cares about writing groups? Why should I care about whether or not I have people to write with? Writing is a solitary process. Nobody else can write for me. It doesn't really matter, right? And I would argue that the answer to that question is my search for ivory tower came up with a bunch of architectural towers, and I just happened to think this one was the pretty one. So when we think about being in higher ed, particularly as we're working on our doctoral degrees, as we're writing the dissertation, it can get so lonely. I don't know if any of you have felt that way. I know I did, particularly when the pandemic hit. And I went home in March of last year, and I did not come back to school or come back to campus to work until after Labor Day of this year. So 18 months, I was working from home, and I was also writing my dissertation at home. And the writing group that I had prior to the pandemic kind of just crumbled because we were, socially distancing, and it didn't work anymore. So we all know what it feels like to be in a program, to start this process of writing the dissertation and feeling like we just really are sort of, it's between us and our advisor, us and our committee, and there's really not anyone else to come alongside us and help us with that process. Quick overview for you of my doctoral journey. And I feel that it's relevant because of, like Michael mentioned, my experience with writing groups, but also the length of time it took me to finish my PhD. So I offer this as a story of encouragement, not discouragement. It will not take all of you 14 years to finish your PhD, but it did for me. So I started mine in the fall of 2007. I finished my coursework in 5 semesters. I was done, and I promptly dropped out of my program. I thought I would come back in a year or two, but life just got in the way, and it was nearly 7 years before I came back to my program. Thankfully, they didn't make me take the GRE again. They didn't make me, really reapply. It was more just like, okay, you're in, you've registered, you're cool, you're here. So I came back in 2016, and I was ready for my comprehensive exams. Not quite as ready as I thought I was going to be. I actually failed my 3rd written exam. So in our department, the English department, you have 3 written exams and then an oral defense. Well, I failed my 3rd written exam. Absolutely devastated. Didn't know what to do with myself. And as you will see by the next arrow, it took me 2 years to finish that final exam. Thankfully, in the fall of 2018, I did pass my comps. Hallelujah, right? But the committee that I had kind of starting out it just was not working for me, right? The dynamics with these different committee members. So what Dr. Duffy said about your committee is absolutely true. If the dynamics between the faculty members themselves and or your relationships with them are not working, it might be time to try and move on if you're able to, if your department is large enough. Thankfully, ours is pretty stinking big, and so I asked a different faculty member to be my chair, and then I changed all of the other members except for one, and actually Dr. Duffy was on my committee. And so they graciously all said, yes, we will be on your committee, we are here to support you. And about 6 months later, I was able to defend my prospectus, which was in February of last year. It was February 22nd. I think I went home from work on March 16th of last year, somewhere around there. And so it was just there on the brink of the pandemic. It's a really good timing, right? That if this is going to happen, at least I got it out of the way before the pandemic. And as Michael mentioned, thankfully, I made it through my dissertation between last February and August, well, really July of this year, because I had to have all my revisions in and everything. And yes, that is me standing on the stage with my chair, Dr. Tucker, and with Dr. Poston and Dr. Nina, Dean of the graduate school and the provost. So, ta-da! I finished. I wrote my dissertation, and it was an absolutely painless process because I had all this time at home alone by myself with the cat. And my husband's a firefighter and he's gone all the freaking time. So it was great. Absolutely not, y'all. Again, I don't know how everyone else operates. I was so lonely. I'm actually an introvert, but I do not like to be alone. I like there to be at least like one other human being in my house. And quite frankly, the cat's sweet, but he doesn't count. So what did I do? This is kind of what happened. This is the less silly of the pictures that we took via Zoom. These are some of the women who are in my writing group, and it's a group that I'm actually still a part of right now. So none of us actually live in the same city. Actually, that's not true. A couple of people live in the same city but have never met. Like the 2 ladies on the far end of that middle road, they both live in Vancouver, but they have actually never met face to face because of the pandemic. A couple of ladies who joined us were actually from my department, like from the English department. We were all getting our PhDs in literature, but one of the ladies lived in California and the other one lived like way out in Cordova. So it wasn't like we were meeting face to face. So how did I get this group? And this is not the route that I'm advocating today. I'm just kind of sharing my journey with you. Last July, I submitted my first chapter, which was great, but it had also taken me almost 6 months to write. And I just thought, I cannot afford for every single chapter to take 6 months to write. It's like, I'm never going to graduate. And at this point, 2007, people, when I started the PhD, I wanted to be done. And so I convinced my husband that I was going to spend a decent chunk of money and join a paid dissertation cohort that I found via Facebook, actually. This one just happened to be only for women who are in the doctoral process, and so that's why you see all girls here. But that's how I met most of these women. And we started, there were just 2 of us, and then there were 3 of us, and then there were like 5 of us, and then maybe 7, and then 10, because people would say, well, hey, can I ask so-and-so who was in our cohort? And I'm like, yeah, totally, please bring them in. And then somebody would say, hey, I have a friend who is in my program. Can I ask if they want to join? And I'm like, of course, right? So we wound up with somewhere between 10 and 15 people in our group. Now that is pretty big. But the reason why it worked for us, I think, is because we were not trying to coordinate all of our schedules all of the time. We live in different time zones from the West Coast, so Pacific, to the UK, which is 6 hours ahead of us. So we have a pretty significant time difference. But what we would do is we would just throw a message in our chat thread. Somebody would say, actually, one of them came up while Dr. Duffy was speaking. She said, I'm going to be in the Zoom room for a couple of hours. Does anyone want to join me? And a couple of the ladies were like, yeah, I'll be there in a few minutes, right? So 3 of my friends from the writing group are actually in our Zoom room right now working on their dissertations, which is pretty cool. So it is my strong belief that without these women, without their company, without their encouragement, without that support and just kind of that accountability, knowing that somebody was going to be in that Zoom room that I created, and they were going to be waiting for me every single morning, was a huge motivator, and it's really what helped me get through that stinking dissertation, right? So, and really and truly, the 2 women who were in my program who had joined us, when they set their defense dates for June and July, I was like, y'all are further behind in the writing process than I am. How in the heck are you going to defend in a month? And they're like, we're just doing it. And I was like, well, if you can do it, I can do it. And guess what? I did it. I still had basically 2.5 chapters to write out of 5. So half of my dissertation left to write. And I did it. I knocked it out in about 5-6 weeks-ish. But it was really because I had people who were there and like we were communicating with one another, and it really made a huge difference. So before I decided to create this presentation, I actually asked the women in my group to provide me some of the feedback, because as I've mentioned, we kind of came together pretty organically. So even though, yeah, some of us started as like assigned accountability partners in our cohorts, the rest of everything just kind of just flowed in, right? We didn't have a really sort of like set way of meeting people necessarily. But I asked them, I was like, what is it that you think has kept us together? We know how we met, we know how we got together, but what has sustained this group? And after talking to them and actually getting a little bit of written feedback as well, the 2 things that came out of those conversations were that for a writing group to work, you have to have some level of camaraderie or rapport with the other members of your group. And secondly, you have to be willing to be held accountable and also to hold other people accountable as well. And so we're going to talk about some of those things. When you think about forming a group, if that is your desire, some of the topics that you need to consider, and these will be the next few slides, is what is your purpose in having a group? Who are the people you want to have involved in that space with you? Where are you going to meet? Is it going to be in person or not? Basically, this one. What form of communication are you going to use for the group itself? And then what sort of habits are you going to establish together as you proceed with your group? And some of this is going to sound like common sense, but since I was asked to break down how to form a writing group, that is what we did. So for some people, a writing group might really be about primarily the logistical or kind of steps that we have to take in order to finish a dissertation. So some people might just simply or primarily be interested in, I need somebody to come alongside me and hold me accountable to get my stuff done. I just want to research, read, and write, and that's it. There are other people who might also feel like they really need the moral support. I mentioned that that was something that I needed because I was incredibly alone with the pandemic. My husband's gone all the time. And I needed that company. You might have some other goal that I honestly couldn't brainstorm on my own. There might be something else that you're wanting to get out of having a group. And lastly, you might have some combination thereof. So it might be that you do want to get your things done, but you also want a space where people will befriend you and kind of encourage you and support you as you proceed throughout this process. Okay. Obviously, if you're going to have a group, you need to have people, right? And again, this is where I mentioned that this might seem like common sense, but at the same time, I think I have a few recommendations that maybe not everyone is familiar with. Obviously, you can meet people here. There aren't a ton of people at this particular event, but there might be somebody here that you come and chat with today, and you're like, hey, do you want to form a group and let's find a couple other people? Obviously, working in your department, if you have colleagues, or if you, I don't know if any of our departments on this campus at this university have actual cohorts that move through programs together, but if you do, that would be a cool place to start. There are also some Facebook groups, and as one of my students told me about 5 years old, sorry about that, that was my email. Facebook is for quote old people, and I'm like, I don't know what that means, but it's the social media that I'm the most familiar with, and so these are some of the groups that I had joined as a doctoral student, where I found people who were interested in forming a group. And the Finisher Sisterhood, that middle one there is, so that's the free group, and then I joined the paid cohort, which was kind of like a separate entity within that group, and that's where I met Dylan and who I work with. But I see posts pretty frequently online saying, hey, is there anyone who might be interested in working together? I really just need some accountability, or I need, just some company while I'm writing. Do I need to pause? Is anyone still taking notes?
I'll be posting all the slides.
Okay.
So people want that.
Perfect. Okay. I was trying to make those dancing people, y'all. Even without the pandemic, I think it's good to know, like, how are we going to meet? Now, I will say the writing groups that I tried to participate in prior to the pandemic were all in person. And there was one that I had that was really effective, but like I said, we kind of just fell apart when the pandemic hit. I think we were all just taken aback, and we were like, like, we don't know what we're doing. Like, it just, So that didn't work out for us. But if you're in a place where you're comfortable with how things are, whether it's your vaccination status or whatever, however you feel about COVID, in person might be an option for you right now. But obviously, you want all of the members in your group to be on the same page. You don't want to have like 2 people who would rather meet in person and 3 who want to meet virtually. That doesn't really work for a group. You really need to have the same space chosen for the entirety of your group. And then I just said digital platform because there are so many. Right? I mentioned that my group uses Zoom, that there's Google Hangout, there's Blue Jeans, Facebook rooms, all different kinds of places that I know we've become familiar with, particularly because of COVID. One of my friends, this was her idea. She said, you have to have an external means of communication. And I was like, what? And then I kept reading what she had written. I was like, oh, okay, I got it. And what she meant by that is that you need to have some sort of established line of communication with the entire group. So we use Facebook Messenger because that's kind of how we all, well, the initial group all met, and then we just started adding quote friends into the group via Facebook. And that is how we communicate with one another. So when somebody's ready to study or write, again, like I said earlier, we'll just throw a message in there. Somebody else will respond and say, hey, I'll meet you there in 45 minutes. we'll work for 2 hours. You know, it's for us, it's very organic because we are using a digital platform. But just make sure that you have some sort of external means of communication. And again, that might seem like it's common sense, but you want to have a dedicated thread, right? You don't want to be going like mixing up communication between email and text messages or Facebook, or like, hey, I talked to so-and-so on Facebook, but this other person got an email. Like, try to keep it all together so that everybody can see what's happening at the same time. Okay. Just makes things a lot more fluid. Give me just a moment. After I put that top graphic up there, I thought that almost looks more like a calculator than a calendar, but it's supposed to be a calendar. Obviously, you need to make sure that everyone agrees how often you're going to meet. Now, my group, we started out with Monday and Friday mornings at 9 o'clock, like 9 to 11 a.m. Like, okay, cool. And then it was like, hey, I think I can be there on Thursday mornings, or at least some Thursday mornings. So we went to 3 days a week. And then eventually I would plan a work schedule around to where it was every morning. And then sometimes, some days, it was all day, every day. And I just stayed on for the company while I was doing my work remotely. I know that doesn't work for everyone again, but that's how we did it. So in the high cohort that we first were a part of, we learned a method. It's called the Pomodoro method. You can Google it. It's very simple. The idea is that when you do have a group that's getting together to work, that you work for 25 minutes via a timer. You set another timer for 5 minutes, you take a break, and you start it over again. And for whatever reason, tomato timers are associated with this technique. So if you were to Google it, you're probably going to see a tomato timer somewhere. I have no idea why. It's beyond me, but I just know it's part of that. So we were pretty fluid with that too. Some of us preferred, we call them palms on parties, like Pomodoro. Some of us preferred longer palms, some of us preferred shorter ones. And basically whoever was in the room at a given time would just have a quick discussion about how long they wanted to work and then how long we were going to break. And that's what we would do. That's how we did that. And lastly here, in terms of habits, you need to have someone who is kind of leading the group. Obviously, this is not someone who is dictating anything. You just need someone who's kind of holding the reins. And what I mean by that is just someone who is consistent about showing up, about communicating, about making sure that people are receiving communication from the group, that they feel included, that they're still wanting to participate, that kind of thing. So that kind of became my job in our writing group. And I think that had more to do with the fact that one, I created the Zoom link, and two, I created the Facebook group or like the chat group. But that was really all I did in the beginning. And then I think it was just that I was on Zoom all day, every day. And so they kind of just start asking me questions like, is it okay if we do this? Maybe we should do that. And so now, even though I've graduated, one of the first things I do almost every single morning is I get up and I send a message to my friends in the group and I'll say, good morning, ladies. I hope you're having a great day. If I'm able to come on later in the day, I will. I know so-and-so said that they wanted to work today, just kind of giving everyone a little bit of a nudge, right? So if you're going to have a group leader, it's just someone who's there to just kind of facilitate the process and facilitate the group dynamics. Okay, so now you have your group, you know why you want to work together, you know where you're going to work, you know who's in the group, which is always good. And you have all these other kind of issues sort of, you're like, okay, cool. We know what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Now, how are we going to stick together? Like, what is going to keep us together as a group? And so this is just what I call sustainability. And we're going to talk about these factors here in the subtitle. Most of these ideas came again from the ladies in my group, but I was really on board with what they had to say and really loved how they said it. So some of the things that you can do to build rapport, camaraderie, with people in your group is first and foremost, you need to be honest with one another. And what I mean by that is that if any of y'all are familiar with Brene Brown, social worker, she's written a few books and whatnot, she talks about vulnerability. If you're willing to be vulnerable, i.e. honest with other members of your group about your struggles, about your frustrations, about whether it's your program, about the process of writing, about you're working in the lab and having a hard time getting the results that you need, whatever it is, you need to be able to be honest with one another. Because what that winds up doing at the end of the day is it builds trust, right? So you're not alone. It's not just one person whose ego is over there going, oh, I'm doing great. I finished chapter 1 in 3 days and my advisor says it's perfect, right? There's none of that. It's very much like evening out the playing field. Just be honest with one another. There's always some sort of struggle, right? Like Will said earlier, there's always some sort of resistance. So just be honest with one another. And then moving on to investing in one another, really what we mean by that is simply make sure you know who is working on what. You mentioned, well, somebody mentioned education reform earlier. Yeah. And so like if I were in your group, I would want to know a little bit more about your research, right? Like what is your subtopic? Are you talking about education reform in an urban setting, in rural settings, in elementary schools? You see what I'm saying? Like we would know things about one another, and you would know that I was writing about fiction that was set in Memphis because my dissertation is in American literature, particularly Southern literature. So you would know what these basic ideas. And that being said, even though one of my friends in my writing group is finishing her PhD in physics at Georgia Tech, I'm like, Elaine, you're the smartest person in the group. Like, I don't know what you're studying, but when she says she has a rough day at the lab, I know what that means. I know enough about her, I know enough about her research that when she's had a rough day, I can be there for her, and I know what it means to her overall research when something is or is not going the way that she needs it to go. We also share a lot of resources with one another, in particular about our writing, interestingly enough. So we've had folks throw a message in our chat and say, I am struggling with this literature review. I don't even know what a literature review is. And my advisor is telling me that I have to do da, 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 da. And then someone else responded, I have this great YouTube video that I watched before I wrote my lit review. And they throw the link in the chat. The first person writes back, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Like, thank you so much. Now I can, like, this literally happened. Like, the first person was like, okay, I can do this now. I've got it. So just share resources with one another. You don't even have to be in the same field of study. Just share those kinds of resources, right? And then lastly, to build rapport, you celebrate your successes. And the big one you would think in a doctoral level writing group is graduation. And that certainly comes with its own celebration in our group. We started a tradition last spring of making sure that we send flowers to each woman as she passes her defense, which is pretty cool. So like 5 minutes after my defense was over, I'm not even kidding, like I got this lovely bouquet of flowers at my house, which was so cool. And one of my friends in the UK was actually the one who ordered it. So it doesn't even like, space and place aren't really prohibitive in that manner. But you can also celebrate smaller successes. There are days when someone is saying, I am terrified to contact my committee. I haven't really spoken to them in almost 2 years because of the pandemic. No one's been on campus. But I want to set my defense date. And I'm really scared that if I reach out, they're going to say, no, we haven't seen your research in the last 2 years. Who do you think you are? And so in terms of celebrating a success, when that friend comes back to us and says, okay, I've set up my meetings with each of my individual committee members. I'm really scared, but I've done it. And we're like, Elaine, we love you. Like, that is so great. We are so proud of you. Like, that is one major next step towards graduation, right? Like, just encouraging one another with each step that we take that moves us forward to that final goal. I mentioned earlier that you have to be able to hold one another accountable. And I feel like accountability sometimes has like a really sort of heavy like tenor to it. And I don't really mean it in that way. Holding one another accountable, it just simply means coming alongside someone as they're building their goals and as they're setting their intentions towards subdividing those goals down into smaller goals. But before you can do that, you have to have already built some level of rapport, some level of trust. And then you also have to have permission to actually say something to somebody, right? There are people, I imagine, who don't want you to say, hey, Mary Jo, did you get your, your proposal draft submitted to your chair on Halloween like you wanted to? Mary Jo, if she's not comfortable with that, might tell you whether or not she's submitted her draft, but she might not actually want you to come out and actually say it, particularly in front of the group. Now, in our group, we have where it says public callouts. We call it public shaming, which is supposed to be funny, y'all. So what that really means is that someone says, okay, if I am not in the room tomorrow by 10 a.m. my time, I need y'all to call me out and I will show up. And so what we'll do is, it's Facebook, so we can tag somebody in the group. We're like, Alana, you said you were going to be here. Where are you? Like, is Henry sick? If your son, like, is he home from school? Like, why are you not in this room? And she'll respond with something about, like, she had to take the dog out, or I'll be there in 15 minutes. I'm so sorry, whatever. But it's a way to, again, just kind of help one another continue to show up for ourselves and to kind of stay in integrity with our writing and with our work. Arguably, some of this could be considered a little out of order because I really think that sharing goals and intentions with one another also builds rapport and trust, because you're showing someone else that you're committed to a particular task in a particular time frame. And earlier I mentioned, supporting one another, whether or not someone's made a small step or a large step, whether it's graduation or writing that hard email. There have been times when someone said, I just need to write this sentence. I cannot get past this sentence. And so we'll take a poem, a writing session, and at the end of it, we'll be like, all right, Krista, did you get that sentence? Like at the end of your paragraph writing? And she's like, yes, thank God I did. And we're like, you go, girl. Like, we are so proud of you. It's always like celebrating that success of that goal being accomplished. And one of the things that we like to do is, we don't always do it, but it's helpful, like at the beginning of a writing session, I'll say, all right, ladies, what are y'all's intentions? And some of you may have heard that term from yoga, but it also, this is kind of part of our cohort, and we sort of kept that vocabulary. But during this particular writing session, my intention is that I'm going to write a paragraph about the father from this particular text. He's really important, and I have to develop who this character is and why he relates back to my overall theme. And so I tell my friends that in my writing group. Sometimes we'll actually put it in the Zoom chat, so it's like there in text. And then at the end of that session, we all have a quick discussion. Hey, Heather, were you able to move through that list of findings that you were talking about? Or Meredith, did you finish that paragraph that you mentioned? Okay, so it's just one of those things that you can do. Again, that does go back to holding people accountable, but also just simply sharing those goals on the front end builds trust and keeps you on track, really. So this is my cheesy group reminder. We're going to pretend like this is a writing group, and they're all like, yeah, this is cool. But without camaraderie or rapport, as well as accountability, a writing group is probably not going to work very well. You have to be willing to be there for one another. You don't have to become best friends. Although the ladies in my group, y'all, we've been together for, we've lost count. It's like 14, 16 months, something like that. It's been well over a year. And, you know, we live on different continents in different countries all across the United States. And we're like, we're getting together at some point. Once this stinking pandemic is over and most of us have graduated, we are totally getting together. And one of my friends flew through Memphis and she actually stayed with me one night. So I got to meet one person in my group, but not everybody. So again, you don't have to be best friends, but you do really just need to be there for one another, be willing to kind of invest a little bit. So before I move into the pilot program that we're presenting this fall, I just wanted to open up the floor for any questions or comments about writing groups in general. This is the end of my sort of presentation on the practical components of forming and sustaining a writing group. Yeah, absolutely. I wrote a chapter on Jewish literature set in Memphis. That was one of my body chapters. And one of my writing group members is Jewish. And I asked her if she would be willing to read my chapter to make sure that I was being as culturally sensitive and appropriate as possible. And she and her daughter both read it and sent it back to me via email and had some comments for me. And there was one part that completely changed my interpretation of this scene in the book. And I was like, oh, that's what that is. Like, I think I completely interpreted that part. And so I was able to go back in and edit that section of my dissertation or of that chapter. So absolutely, yeah, you can share resources with one another in that way. Yes, ma'am.
So do you think it is okay to have a co-ed or just all women?
I think it's whatever you prefer.
Oh,
You know, I keep mentioning ladies just because we sort of developed, I think that if a group stays together long enough, eventually you're going to develop sort of your own culture, right? And so in our group, we have talked about some pretty sensitive topics that do relate more so to females than to males, things around you know, fertility and that kind of stuff, things that we might not feel as comfortable talking about if there were men present in the group. And so we've actually had that conversation that for us, we're just going to keep it to women only, but I don't see any reason why, you know, you shouldn't have whoever you want in the group. Yeah, it's totally. When the group I had before the pandemic was 2 girls and a guy, and it was great. Like, it was totally fine. It just changes with that music of the group. The way that it would in any other social or academic setting.
She found my side. Okay, so I mean, when she was looking for her research, she knows that my side. She remembered it. And so she knew information. So she said, hey, actually, that's your time. Everything I'm finding, it caters to your time. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's good when you have colleagues like that in your department who are willing to share what they found. And she knew you well enough to know what your topic was. Yeah, and to know that it was relevant to your research. Yeah, absolutely.
Meredith?
Yeah.
We have a question in the chat asking about, if you could go over again exactly how your group came together, because I know it came from multiple sources. So they're asking maybe like, how did it kind of come together and stuff?
Okay, yeah. So for me, I mentioned the paid cohort, but actually what started at the very beginning was one of my library colleagues and I were/are getting our PhDs in the same department in English. And so we had talked about last fall, we were gonna get together on Mondays and Friday mornings and write for a couple of hours. Well, by this time, I had been in that paid cohort for a couple of months, and I started to get to know some of those ladies pretty well. And so I asked my friend from here, from UFM, hey, do you mind if I invite a couple of the ladies from my cohort? And she was like, no, that's fine. And so I started inviting a couple of people, and then those people would say, hey, do you remember Sasha from our cohort? Like, can we invite her? And I was like, of course. And then somebody was like, what about Asia? Like, and I was like, yeah. And then another friend said, hey, I have actually 2 women who are in my program at my school. Obviously, they didn't participate in my cohort, but can they join? And I was like, of course. They both only showed up once. I think we scared them away, but they came, you know, for a minute, right? They were both lovely individuals. I wish they had stuck around. And then actually at the DWR event we had back in, was it January?
The first one was
Yeah.
January 2020.
No, but this year.
Oh, yeah, January 2021.
Yeah, we had one in January of this year, and it was all completely via Zoom. And we get on the screen, and I got so excited, y'all. I was like, "Oh my God, it's Esther!" And Esther's one of my friends from my department, and she was like, "Meredith, I've missed you," because they moved back home to California to be closer to their parents, and she and her husband did. And so we hadn't seen each other in like 2.5, 3 years, something like that. And she was just mentioning how hard it was for her at that time. And I was like, hey, I totally think you should join our writing group. And so she joined us. And then she said, hey, what about, do you remember Dale Williams? And I was like, yeah, I know Dale a little bit. And she said, I think she wants to join us. And I was like, okay. Well, Dale, Esther, and I all graduated together at the same time. And then a few weeks later, I get a text message from Dale saying, hey, I have this friend who doesn't go to UFM, who doesn't live in Memphis. She lives in North Carolina, I think. But she really needs that same company. I think she wants to be part of the group. Here's her phone number. And so I texted this other woman, and she joined us. So it's been, like I said, very organic for us. And I think it works for us in that way because we are online and just because of the dynamics of our group. But that's how we got started. Yeah.
Was it hard for you to come back to school after 7 years? And what motivated you to come back?
Ooh, did y'all hear that? Okay. Yes, it was so hard to come back. And it was because, guess what? I was lonely. So even though I was in a building full of people, I was in a building that I had been moving in and out of since I was 17 as a college freshman. I didn't really know hardly anyone. All of my friends who I had initially started my program with had graduated and moved on to other jobs. And it took months of me having to kind of put myself out there and get to know some of these quote unquote new people for me to start feeling comfortable in my own skin in that place again. And eventually I joined the board of our graduate organization in our department, and I got to know almost all of the faculty and have a really good relationship with all of them. And so that really helped too, that I did that. As far as what motivated me to come back to school, I've always wanted a PhD. I was that kid in elementary, middle, high school. If somebody said that there's this academic goal or prize or whatever that you can get, I was like, I'm gonna do that. So before I even knew what a PhD was, I think I was like 12 years old and I heard about PhDs. I was like, I want one of those. Like more college, more school, yeah, I'm gonna do that. Did not know what I was getting myself into. But I wanted a PhD. I wanted to know that partially, I mean, honestly, as a woman, I wanted to know that I had some level of credentials that if anything ever happens to my husband, that I can take care of myself. So yeah, that's a real concern, because I have been working part-time, honestly, the whole time I've been married, because I was in grad school the whole time. So it's like, okay, now I have these credentials, maybe now I can actually get a real job, and make some money that can sustain me on my own if anything were to happen. And I just gotta say, y'all, it feels really good. So like when Dr. Duffy, I walked up to him earlier, he's one of my committee members, right? So it's been Meredith for the last 6 years, and I walked up and he goes, "Hello, Dr. Boulden." I was like, "Hello, Dr. Duffy," and it feels amazing. And now when I fill out forms, like, for the doctor's office or something, and ask for title, I'm like, bam, doctor, no missus, no miss, it says doctor. And I have told all my friends and family that if they do not follow Emily Post's directions for sending mail to our house at Christmas, like on Christmas cards, it's supposed to say Dr. and Mr. Boulden. I was like, I will send them back to you. So just letting y'all know that I am, as Michael said, I am freshly reminted as a PhD, as a doctor. So I have been not so very long ago where you guys are, and in the throes of, oh my dear God, how am I going to do this? I can't do this. And then it was finally, I'm going to get this done, and nobody's going to stop me. Nobody's going to tell me no. Like, there just came this point where something just clicked, and I was like, nope, this is it. I am done. I'm DOAD, and I'm going to graduate, and nobody's going to stop me. And the women in my group supported that. And I mean, obviously, my family and my friends here too, right? But my writing group is definitely. So, any more questions or? Yeah.
Well, I've just been here 2 months now. I started doctorate in social behavioral science, but how do you go through the experience of having to, deal with all the, workload that, is around you? I have, this semester, I have almost, three assignments. One, I have to come up with a qualitative design proposal. The other is doing manuscript on substance use. Then I have to do also a behavioral intervention grant. And I have no idea how to start this. In some of the assignments, we have put into groups, but still a little bit hard, trying to figure out, where to start from all this. So how do you do it?
You mean like the different genres of writing? Like,
Yeah, like writing, how to get some started, how to
right, yeah. So you said you're doing a manuscript, a grant proposal, and a research proposal? Yeah. So you might start first, this is probably where I would start, is talking to the other students in the program to see if they have ever written any of those types of documents. And if they have, if they would be willing to share them with you. That's the first thing I would do. Second thing, or maybe even at the same time, maybe email your advisor or your committee and ask them what they were talking about earlier with journals. Asking at the same time, because I imagine that in different fields of study that like grant proposals and manuscripts and whatnot is a little different. So like my research proposal was like a 25-page essay, whereas I know for some people who are doing a quantitative or qualitative research study, you're going to have your theoretical groundwork, your methodology, your projected results, that kind of thing is going to look different in terms of the actual genre of writing. So yeah, I talk to faculty and ask them either if they have a sample document or if they have, for instance, I've done a little bit of research into grant writing. I've never actually written a grant proposal myself. But maybe like just Googling like grant writing and in your discipline, like grant writing, social work, and kind of see maybe what comes up. Honestly, Google is my best friend a lot of the times. And then outside of that, you could always make an appointment at the Writing Center. And I'm also a consultant at the Writing Center. That's my part-time job right now. It's my gig until I figure out what it is that I'm doing with this PhD. So maybe not everyone there has written this, but if you come see me afterwards, I do know someone who's very familiar with grant writing, and I can give you her name, and she could definitely help you with at least that component of that. I don't know if I answered all your questions. But I hope it works a little bit. Okay, we get to move on real quick because I have one last thing to share with y'all. Cool. All right, so I'm very excited about this. We are starting UFM Writing Groups. Now, caveat to that is that we actually have to have people who are interested in being in a writing group. And I would be absolutely 100% thrilled if you were, because quite frankly, this was my bright idea. But hopefully it'll work. Justin Williams, here's one of the consultants at the Writing Center. He was here earlier, sitting in the back, and he left to actually go do some actual writing on his dissertation this afternoon. But he's the consultant who has been kind of tapped to work with the writing groups. So I want to tell you a little bit more about them. So it's not just simply going to be that we're putting students together so that they can work together and go through all those things and make all those decisions that I was talking about earlier. Like that obviously is part of it. But the second component is that we want to offer you an additional layer of support. So what Justin would do is he has 5 hours a month where he can spend 1 hour at a time with the members of a particular writing group. And if they have questions, not so much about a piece of writing, but about the writing process, then he will be there for that. So as I mentioned over here on the left, so what writing groups are: an external source of accountability, right? A space where students can express their frustrations about writing, and then lastly, it's apply a couple writing recommendations. So if, for instance, you're having a hard time with like the genre of an assignment, then Justin could come alongside you and maybe help you find some resources to help you get started. If you're having a hard time with writer's block, you're just stuck, you can't get started, you don't know what to do, Justin will be there to offer you some solutions for that. Yeah, so just like different pieces of the writing process, right? So what this is not, and I've mentioned this over here on the right, is that these will not be CWC appointments. So the CWC is that one-on-one consultation, right? Where we actually get to look at your writing and give you some feedback that's individualized to you, to your project, and to your writing. So that is not what this time will be for. It is, like I said, it's more about the broad strokes of the writing process itself. Okay, I'm going to have the link up here in just a moment. But if you are in, or if you would like to be a part of a writing group and you don't already have one, so new groups over here, the link that I'm going to put up on the next slide will be where you put in your contact information, and it will go directly to Michael, who's going to cobble these together. And we are going to cap the number of people in a group to 4 to 6 students. The idea being that if you have, like, say, 2 members of a group who can't meet on a given date, you might still have 3 or 4 other people who can, right? So there's a little bit of fluidity there where you can still meet with one another. It's not like you have 3 people and 2 people say, I don't want to meet today, I'm just going to stay home, and that one person is left on their own. Hopefully, if you have enough people, then at least a couple of people can meet together and kind of get some things done. There will be 2 questions for you. One of them is going to be whether or not you would prefer to be in like a single disciplinary group. So do you want to be in a group with people who are in disciplines that are either the same or similar to yours? Or would you prefer a multidisciplinary group? Do you want to be around people who are studying perhaps vastly different things from what you are studying? And then we're going to do our best to make accommodations for students who are remote. So if there's anyone here via Zoom who does not live in Memphis, we have, believe it or not, a number of doctoral students from across campus who don't actually live here anymore. Like they've taken jobs elsewhere, or they moved back to their home countries for whatever reason, and they're finishing out their degrees remotely, not just because of COVID, right? And we're going to do our best to accommodate having those students as well. So obviously those groups would have to meet remotely via some sort of digital platform. If you are already in a writing group, which I think from my question earlier, I don't think anyone here is in a writing group. But if you are, we just need 1 person from that group to fill out the sheet and the link that I'm about to put up, and just provide the names and contact information for all of the members of that group. And the reason why you're doing this, obviously you would already have your group, but it's so that you can be, signed up to work with Justin and have that one-on-one time with him. once a month. We're going to be doing this at least through the end of this year, so like the fall semester, with hopes that we'll continue it, in the spring and kind of grow the program. This is very much a pilot stage. We pulled together the most basic ideas that we could in a very short amount of time. So that is why we're only going to have, probably about 5 groups or so who meet with Justin until the end of the year. And I did not talk to Michael about this, but I would imagine that if enough people signed up, because I think we're going to be sending this out via the graduate school as well. So it's going to be offered up to other graduate students across campus who did not attend this event. If we had more groups sign up later, it may be that we could put them on some sort of waiting list. I think is what we're probably going to have to do. So if you are interested and it's something that you would really like to be a part of, I would urge you to go ahead and jump in and put your name in the pool, and we can try to get you hooked up with some other students. So this is that link. Sorry it's so long.
Don't worry about writing it down. I will email it out to everyone.
Okay,
Yes.
I figured, but yeah.
I wish they would allow me to make a short version of the link, but yeah,
Walters doesn't like to do that.
Walters does not like to have friendly links. But I will be emailing it out to everyone, which is why if you did not contact me before and you just kind of came by or hope that there was still room, come see me so I can get your contact info and get you on the mailing list.
Okay. And with that, since Michael's going to email everyone, the last thing that I wanted to say is that, because I'm the concluding speaker for the day, is that the ultimate goal of all of the things that we have offered to you today in terms of topics and assistance is that we want to come alongside you and also help you in that process towards graduation. We want to see you all become the doctors that you deserve to be, and we're really excited to have the programming and the types of assistance that we can offer to you guys. Michael, have you mentioned the events like for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I gave a little sneak peek of, we're continuing to do the writing sprints through the fall and have it scheduled up for the spring. And there's going to be our January retreat, which is like what we've done before, and something over spring break that I'm still brainstorming.
Okay, so just as a reminder, did anybody in this room come to the first BWR in January 2020?
I don't think so.
She's like, you think so? You think you were here? Maybe it was kind of like 5 days long, the week before school started in January. Okay. So just a real quick recap. If you don't want to be in a writing group, which is right from my heart, but that's okay. If you don't want to be in a writing group, we will have an event in January where we'll have a 5-day period that'll be here in the library. And last year we had assigned study carrels for each student. So on the 3rd and 4th floors, like each student could have a space where they could go and study. And what we would do is we would get together in the morning, have like breakfast, kind of like what's over on a high top table, have one presentation, like a short presentation in the morning, and then have a writing block after that, where students could go and write on their own or in groups if they wanted to. And then we would have lunch. Then we would do another writing session, and then ta-da, you're free to go home. So it's just kind of a nice set time, particularly if you're working on, let's say, finishing up a chapter or finishing up the perspectives, or for that matter, brainstorming perspectives or something like that. It's just a really good event for that. I got so much work done at that first one. I got more work done during that event than I probably had in weeks or months before that, just because I wasn't distracted by being at home or by other people. It was just me and the study carrel. That is that. Michael, you have any concluding comments?
Oh, I'm kind of keeping an eye on Zoom, see if there are any final questions, but yeah, I think that's it. I don't have any staggering closing remarks or anything. Just thank you all for being here. Thank you to all of our presenters Dr. Duffy had to go home and watch his kids, unfortunately. Well, not unfortunately for the kids, but unfortunately for us. I wanted to chat with him a little bit afterwards. But yeah, thank you all for being here. Thank you for everyone who attended via virtually. Thank you to Casey, who very like for an event last month, we were able to put together this rig for streaming, which now it's the third time we've done this live streaming, and it's like we've got all the kinks worked out. I'm so grateful that we have this ability now because, you know, not everyone is here in Memphis, as Meredith said. We have students all around the globe, and the ability to include them in these events is invaluable, and to keep this sort of build this community. And by attending this, I will be adding your emails to the list. I'll be sending out the link to the writing group survey. I'll also be sending out a survey about the event just to get feedback, because we're continually trying to iterate, trying to grow, trying to build out this event and make sure we are providing the information that is most valuable to all the students. So yeah, watch your emails and again, watch your emails for future events, future links, everything. And yeah, and I will be adding the videos and the slides to our library database of all the events, and my words are leaving me. So thank you and have a good afternoon.